On this episode of Newt's World, 1 year ago on July 13th, 2024, Donald J. Trump, then a former president of the United States and presumptive nominee of the Republican Party in the 2024 presidential election, survived an assassination attempt while speaking at an open-air campaign rally near Butler, Pennsylvania. There are moments that define America. The late afternoon hours of July 13th, 2024 was one of them. In her new book, Butler, the Untold Story of the Near Assassination of Donald Trump and the Fight for America's Heartland, Salena Zito writes a narrative of that fateful day and describes the people of the Heartland and the untold story of how the president found his way back into the heart of the electorate. I have to say, in welcoming my guest, I regard her as one of the finest reporters in the country, somebody with unusual knowledge, and as she and I were chatting, somebody whose family goes back to the very beginning of Butler, and so her ties to that region are amazing. But on anything she writes, I personally recommend Salena Zito as a remarkable reporter and a great analyst. Salena, welcome, and thank you for joining me on Newt's World.
Oh, my goodness. Thank you so much. It's such an honor, Mr. Speaker. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this.
You know, it's sort of amazing. I didn't realize till later that you were only a few feet from President Trump when the shots rang out. I mean, what was that like?
Well, in that moment, people often say when they are in a tragic situation or they're in a perilous situation, that time slows down. And that was also the case for me. And I remember thinking everything is happening in layers. That's what it felt like. That's the only way I can describe it. When I saw him, again, I'm just a few feet away. I had just seen him 6 minutes earlier in what's called the click area, which is behind the stage. It's a curtained off area. It's a place where the president shakes hands, gives a lot of hugs to state troopers, paramedics, firemen, right? The people that serve the community. And I was supposed to fly to Bedminster with him, along with my daughter, to do an interview with him about Pennsylvania. And he just wanted to say hi. Well, because we were backstage and I can hear the Lee Greenwood music starting up, they made my daughter and myself just go in the buffer. The buffer is the area that surrounds the stage. So that's why we were just feet away. In fact, if you look at the covered Butler, my daughter took that photo. And it has a lot of significance to it. There's a reason I chose one that didn't have his face. I chose one that showed him looking at the people there and them looking back at him. And that's really at the heart of the entire journey of this book, not just that moment, but the rest of the campaign and what happens going forward.
I have to ask, how old is your daughter?
38.
So this must have been, there she was with mom at the center of history.
Yeah, she's a photojournalist. We do a lot of work together. She's also the mother of my 4 grandchildren. So we follow him out. She's taking the photos. I'm doing video just with my phone. People look at my Twitter account that day. They can see that. And then we make our way off to the side of the podium. And he does 2 things that he never does. A chart comes down. And I remember turning to my daughter and saying, Newt, you'll totally get this. I mean, what does he think he is? Ross Perot? Why does he have this chart? If he ever has a chart, the chart is on the other side and it's at the end. But that is also a very rare occurrence. And then he turns his neck away from the people at the rally. Why is that significant? If you've ever watched in great detail to a Trump rally on television or you've ever attended one, the relationship between him and the people attending is very transactional. They feed off of him. He feeds off of them. And they all show respect to each other by never turning away from each other. And he turns his neck away from the rally. It's in those moments that 4 pops go right over my head. I know immediately it's gun shots. I'm a gun owner. And I remember in the moment, watching him grab his ear, seeing the blood, and seeing the Secret Service rush him, right, in a protective stance, I remember thinking, I have purpose here. I am a journalist. God gave me a gift. And I'm a witness to history. And I need to be on top of my game. Never thinking I'd be writing a book about it, but knowing that I had to chronicle it as a journalist and be responsible. So I stood there. I didn't get down. And as the Secret Service are surrounding him, the second round of gunfire goes over our heads. But he is now protected. I mean, they're putting their life in front of him at this moment. And I am watching him kneel down on his own. So I calculate, okay, in this moment, I at least know that he is not gravely hit. I see the blood, but I know that he was able to get down on his own. He didn't get knocked down. He didn't fall down. He didn't collapse. After the second round goes out, Michel Picard III, he was the president's campaign advance man for the event. He just takes me down and lays on top of me in a protective stance. In doing that, I'm just in this unique position where I can see the president's face through the feet of the Secret Service. I can see him moving. I can see him talking. I can hear him talking. I have my recorder on. So I also have it. And I have my recorder on because when I go to a Trump rally, oftentimes I find them to be covered without nuance, without context. And so his words are used flatly as opposed to missing the nuance of when he says it, missing the cadence was when he says something. And so I always record it anyways. And I hear them talking. I understand the shooter is down. That's when Michel Picard finally gets off of me. That is when I hear him talking about his shoes, which I can laugh about now, but it's kind of funny. He's insistent that he gets his shoes on. Why are his shoes off? When they surrounded him, they knocked his shoes off. The crowd starts shouting USA. He mouths it. I can't hear his voice project. He gets up on his own and he's still surrounded and they want to take him off stage. And he goes, wait. He turns around and says, fight. Now, you have to think about that moment. People wonder, why'd he do that? Well, you'll find out in the book the next day, and we can talk about it, why he did actually do it. But you also, if you're watching the video of it, the crowd's comportment completely changes. And there is a calmness there that you would not likely expect when you see a president shot before your eyes in front of 50,000 people. But the way that the people comported themselves, the way that they exited, is something that is very underreported and very powerful. And even in the hours afterwards, they didn't let us go for 2 hours. The parking lot, if there's 50,000 people there, there's at least 15 to 20,000 cars, right? Maybe people goes in 2s or 3s, whatever. And so they're out there in that big old farm field, and you're born in Pennsylvania. You know exactly what that Appalachian farm field is like. They're out there hugging each other, giving each other water. People at coolers were sharing food. They were singing. It was a very beautiful moment, which is why I take issue with an interview that was done the other day with Chuck Dodd, where he was saying, a reporter who covered it said he had PTSD from this crowd. I don't know what crowd he was seeing, but it certainly wasn't the crowd that attended that event.
I think that's a crazy comment.
I have other words, but this is a family show. Say them.
So at that moment, though, you're seeing the president walk off in what I think is one of the most iconic moments in American campaign history. I went that night on Hannity and talked about the notion that this was a providential event because if he had turned 1 second later, he'd have been dead.
Oh, yeah.
His courage and his self-awareness in immediately coming back and chanting, fight, with a raised fist, that was astonishing. I mean, what was your reaction in real time as you were there?
Nothing surprised me in that moment, like in the way he handled that. Nothing. People will find out in the book many details that they don't know about that. He called me the next morning, bright and early, and he calls me and says, Salena, this is President Donald Trump. I was like, laughed. I was like, of course you are President Donald Trump, right? Who doesn't know that voice? But before I could even say a word, he said, I want to make sure that you and your daughter are okay.
Wow.
And I really apologize for not being able to do that interview with you.
Wow.
And I swore like a truck driver and said, are you bleeping kidding me? Sir, you've just been shot. I'm not worried about an interview. He would go on to call me 7 times that day.
Wow.
We had some very, very profound discussions. Just 2 people talking, trying to figure out what happened, why it happened, why he did what he did. God and faith and purpose. I suppose if I were a better reporter, I would have pressed him. I could tell he was going through something and he needed to talk to someone who was there, not family members. Family members aren't going to understand this because they love him, but they weren't there.
Right.
And he and I have mutual respect for each other because of the way he treats the people in the middle of the country. And he knows me. I've interviewed him dozens of times. I let him, because I needed it too, to just figure things out. I wasn't supposed to be where he was either, right? I was supposed to interview him earlier than day. I wasn't supposed to be standing a few feet away from him. The conversations centered on purpose, on faith, on God, on what his obligation is because he was spared. And the last thing we talked about, I asked him, I said, I got to ask you, sir, why'd you say fight, fight, fight? And he said, you know, Salena, to be honest, I wasn't Donald Trump in that moment. I was representing everything about the country and the presidency. And I had an obligation to show strength and that we will endure and that we will go on and nothing will take us down. And I needed to represent that grit, that American exceptionalism, because I knew if I didn't, it could have dire consequences for the people that are there, but also people in the country. I needed to project that strength, and that's why I did it.
I talked with Speaker Johnson, who happened to be at Mar-a-Lago when the second shooter was discovered at the golf course. And he was there when they came in to tell him that there was a second potential shooter. And Mike told me that they went off to a private room and they prayed for about 2 hours. Don't you think this was a transformative event for Trump himself?
I have seen it in him every day. And people will say, well, he's this, well, he's that. And I will argue that there is a profound difference in him in the way that he has conducted his presidency in terms of understanding that every single second of every day counts. And he has to get things done to preserve the country and to make the country strong. But I've also seen moments of faith that a lot of people don't see. On Wednesday, I'm in Pittsburgh. We have this extraordinary energy conference, and I'm set to interview the president. Well, first before, then it ends up happening to be after. I think he and I have this thing that happens like that, right? And we're doing the interview, and I'm with the photographer. I'm not going to use his name, protect his privacy, but I'm with the photographer that I use almost all the time outside of my daughter to photograph the president while we do the interview. He's a very good photographer, and the president knows him as well. Before the interview, the photographer tells me that his father's been diagnosed with a terminal illness, and his father loves President Trump. And I have a copy of my book with me. So at the end of the interview, I said, Mr. President, I need to ask you a favor. He goes, Zito, you never ask me a favor. And I said, I know, sir, but my photographer, who you know very well, his father had received some bad health news. And he's a really, really big fan of yours. And I suspect that this would lift his spirits if you sign my book. President takes his pen. Of course, I'll sign your book. And as he signs the book, he looks up at the photographer. And you could tell that the photographer is very emotionally reacted to this. And he said, look, get that video thing rolling. I'll do you one better. And he does this beautiful moment, a video message to the photographer's father. And the first thing he says is, you have a good boy. Now, what father doesn't want to hear that about their son? Your son works hard. I see him working hard all the time. That alone was profound because that's a father talking to another father. And then he says, God works in ways we don't always understand. So have faith. And I look forward to meeting you. And I looked up, and you've been in those click rooms, right? It's mostly staff and Secret Service. And there was not a dry eye in that room. And so when people ask me about faith and God and the president, and they are very skeptical of it, I always remind them that your belief in a higher power, your belief in God, doesn't mean you have to go around and shout it. Sometimes for people, it's very, very private, but it is always profound and meaningful.
I want to take you back. In my limited experiences with President Trump, I share almost 100% of what you have said about him and the ways he's not understood by the elite media. I want to take you right back to Butler. I mean, you're an eyewitness to history. I've never seen the Secret Service look more incompetent than they did in that whole experience with this guy who apparently wanders in with a rangefinder, then wanders back in later. The whole notion that they didn't cover the roof because it was too sloped. The excuses just strike me as being almost something from a comedy movie.
I mean, we had congressmen days afterwards climbing up on that sloped roof who are not spring chickens. Our men and women in the field are very fit people, right? There's several things that went wrong. First of all, there is this archaic role in the Secret Service that former presidents and or candidates do not get the same amount of protection that the current president has. Now, that's kind of silly. Donald Trump at that time was very different than Jimmy Carter, right? Or Bill Clinton, or George W. Bush, or Barack Obama. He's in the middle of a campaign. He is the presumptive nominee. We're in a polarizing world. And he's getting essentially the same kind of protective stance that any other former president would get. Well, they're not doing rallies. Well, Barack Obama every once in a while will do a rally. But they're not doing rallies. We're in a very polarizing time. There are times when leadership needs to make decisions that go outside of rules that don't meet the moment. The other problem is there was no communication between local law enforcement and the Secret Service. Now, you and I both know that a local law enforcement member, man or woman, they know their hometown and all the nooks and crannies and all the places where all the vulnerabilities, more so than even the most studied agent who would possibly miss something that's a potential threat. I remember pulling up to the event, and when you're a journalist, you got to be there so early. And I remember pulling up and looking up at the water tower. I didn't look just up, but I also looked down to see if someone was just protecting the access to the water tower, because the water tower, which sort of loomed not that far away over the farm field, the ladder to go up, you couldn't see that from the vantage point. So I remember thinking, well, they'll get to that later. I mean, someone either needs to be at the bottom or someone needs to be up there. because this is a big vulnerability. And I didn't think about it again, but there's so many outcroppings of trees that surrounded this farm field. There's so many outbuildings, right? This is a farm show where people show things, livestock in different buildings, and they're peppered all across the place. And there were a lot of them that weren't covered, including the one that Thomas Matthew Crooks climbed on top of.
Do you think that was just a bureaucratic error?
I think it had a lot to do with leadership decisions. I struggle to think of the men and women who were in the field that day, not the decision makers, but the guys who do the field work. I struggle to believe that they made that decision.
You are, without a doubt, the most astute and insightful student of sort of middle American relations to Donald Trump. And you caught this rhythm, I think, very early for his entire career, all the years we've now known him. And you describe at one point this trip you took with him a couple of weeks before Butler, where he's just wandering around small towns. I have a sense that probably more than any other reporter in the country, you have a sense of the rhythm of what's behind all this.
Yes. So a lot of the theme throughout the book, and it's a theme that journalists that live in DC or New York miss, but I would also say strategists and pollsters miss. And that is a sense of place and how that impacts how people vote. Most Americans, 8 out of 10, live within 50 miles of where they grew up. They have a profound connection to place. It is a context and a meaningfulness that is very, very missed by strategists, pollsters, some Republicans and all Democrats, and the news media. Because people tend to vote place and their connection to place as opposed to the way people that are the placeless. So what do I mean by that? So the placeless are people that live in places like DC or New York. I'm not saying they're bad or worse, but they don't know anyone that is tied to their community, that believes that there is more value in being able to have Sunday supper with their grandparents than their grandchildren and their parents and people they went to grade school and high school with, than getting an extra bonus or a new car every year. That's their power. Their power is experiencing the same things that their grandparents did, but also being able to pass that legacy on to their children and grandchildren. And people that live in DC and New York tend to not know people that value that. So they don't know how to cover it. And Donald Trump has always had a very good understanding of place and placelessness. Our cultural curators. Now, what do I mean by that? The people that curate what we see on television, what we see in Hollywood, what we see in government, institutions, academia. They're highly concentrated in these super zip codes in this country and newsrooms. And they don't know and understand what drives your average voter. That's how they missed that Black voters, Hispanic voters, Asian voters voted together because they're voting for the betterment of their family and their community and that continuity, as opposed to voting for the next social justice issue, right? That's that detachment that the Democrats have experienced that President Trump has recognized as a currency for these voters.
I think that's exactly right. And I think your understanding of that, which I picked up on, I think as early as 2015, you just got the rhythm and you understood it. But now I'm going to ask you a totally off the wall question. Young person walks in and says to you, I'm thinking about becoming a journalist. What would you tell them?
Work for a local newspaper, cover the water authority, cover the school board, get the cops reporter beat, cover the things that really matter to people. Don't jump from college to Washington, D.C., because you will not have the ability to understand people. You will not been sat in a school board meeting and understand what really drives people's votes, what really drives people's sentiments, what places them either as a Republican or Democrat because decisions made by local politics. It is an unsexy, unglamorous way to hone your craft, and you're not going to be on TV. Being on TV shouldn't be your driving force. You should learn from the very bottom if you want to be a good journalist.
Is it a fulfilling profession?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think anybody that reads me or is listening to this podcast knows that I am so grateful and so honored people open up their door at their house to me, to let me stand on their soccer fields and talk to them, let me go to their covered dish dinners in Lutheran churches, bowling alleys, diners, small businesses, let me go down in a coal mine. It is an honor to tell their stories. That's my job. That's the joy I get.
You're sort of, I don't overdo it, but in a way you're kind of a poet of the American experience. You pick up the language, you pick up the rhythm, you sense those unique intersections that make us an amazing country. You're a great, great tribute to the profession.
That is such an honor to hear you say that. The book is #1 on the New York Times Bestseller list. And that's not because of me. It's because of all of those people. That's also President Trump opening up with me in a very raw, very emotional way, not just on the next day, but throughout the campaign and even today, allowing me to be able to tell his story as much as I'm allowed to tell the American people's story.
Well, you're amazing. I want to thank you. I regard you as a friend, not just as a colleague in the business of self-government. I want to thank you for joining me. Your new book, Butler, The Untold Story of the Near Assassination of Donald Trump and the Fight for America's Heartland. It's available now on Amazon and in bookstores everywhere. I encourage everyone to get a copy. And I have to tell you, Salena, I'm so thrilled that you would take this amount of time and talk with me.
Absolutely. It was an honor to be with you.
Thank you to my guest, Salena Zito. You can get a link to buy her new book, Butler, on our show page at newtsworld.com. Newt's World is produced by Gingrich 360 and iHeartMedia. Our executive producer is Garnsey Sloan. Our researcher is Rachel Peterson. The artwork for the show was created by Steve Penley. Special thanks to the team at Gingrich 360. If you've been enjoying Newt's World, I hope you'll go to Apple Podcasts and both rate us with 5 stars and give us a review so others can learn what it's all about. Right now, listeners of Newt's World can sign up for my 3 free weekly columns at gingrich360.com/newsletter. I'm Newt Gingrich. This is Newt's World.